The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Willowbrook Station, painting the weathered wooden planks in shades of amber and gold. Clara Whitmore stood motionless beside her worn leather trunk, her white cotton dress catching the desert breeze that carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. She had been waiting for 3 hours now, watching every approaching figure with a mixture of hope and growing dread. The telegram in her gloved hand had grown soft from repeated folding and unfolding, its simple message burned into her memory like a brand on cattle hide. Miss Whitmore, will marry you. Be at Willowbrook Station June 15th, Thomas Brennan. But Thomas Brennan had not come. The other passengers from the morning train had long since dispersed into the small frontier town, collected by family members or disappearing into the maze of dusty streets lined with false-fronted buildings. Even the station master had retreated to the shade of his office, casting occasional sympathetic glances through his window at the solitary figure who refused to abandon her post. Clara had traveled 800 miles from Boston to answer an advertisement in the marriage column of the Eastern Star newspaper. At 26, she was considered well past the marrying age by Boston society standards, her prospects dimmed by her father's gambling debts and her family's fallen fortune. The promise of a new life in the expanding territories had seemed like Providence itself, a chance to escape the whispered conversations and pitying looks that followed her through the narrow streets of her childhood neighborhood. She had sold her mother's pearl necklace to pay for the train fare, carrying only what would fit in a single trunk. Her few possessions included her mother's worn Bible, 3 practical dresses, basic household supplies, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Everything she owned in the world was contained in that trunk, and now it seemed she had nowhere to take it. The sun climbed higher, and Clara's throat grew dry. She had eaten nothing since the previous evening, too nervous to stomach the traveling food sold at the depot stops. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirts, trying to maintain the dignified appearance that had been drilled into her by years of finishing school lessons. Even in defeat, her mother had always said, "A lady maintains her composure." It was then that she heard the sound of small feet running across the wooden platform, accompanied by the heavier boot steps of someone trying to keep up. Clara turned to see a little girl with dark braids flying behind her, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a simple blue calico dress that had been carefully mended at the hem. Behind her, a man's deep voice called out in gentle reproach. "Sarah Rose, you slow down now. What did I tell you about running off?" The little girl came to an abrupt stop directly in front of Clara, her dark eyes wide with wonder. She tilted her head to one side, studying Clara's face with the unguarded curiosity that only children possess. For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other while the man's footsteps approached. "Are you the angel Mama sent?" the child asked, her voice carrying the sweet clarity of complete innocence. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself to the child's eye level, her heart doing something strange and fluttery in her chest. Up close, she could see that the little girl's dress, while clean and well cared for, showed signs of careful darning. Her small hands were clean but bore the calluses of someone who helped with chores beyond her years. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I'm who you're looking for." The man finally caught up to them, and Clara looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. As her eyes adjusted, she found herself looking at a cowboy who appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and gentle brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his faded blue shirt, and he held a worn hat in his calloused hands. There was something in his expression that spoke of loss and quiet strength, the kind of sadness that had learned to coexist with hope. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice carrying a soft drawl that spoke of long days under open skies. "Sarah Rose here has a powerful imagination, and she's been expecting someone special." He placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Come on now, little one. This lady has her own business to tend to." Sarah Rose, however, remained fixed in place, her gaze never leaving Clara's face. "But, Papa, look at her. She's got the same eyes as the angel in Mama's picture book, and her dress is white like clouds." The child reached out tentatively and touched Clara's hand. "Are you waiting for someone to?" Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The simple question, asked with such innocent directness, seemed to pierce straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "We've been waiting too," Sarah Rose confided, moving closer to Clara with the fearless trust of childhood. "Papa says Mama sent an angel to take care of us, but she might be shy about coming down from heaven. I've been looking for her every day." The man's face flushed red with embarrassment, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Sarah Rose, that's enough now. I told you that story to help you understand about." He stopped himself, glancing at Clara with apologetic eyes. "I'm Jake Morrison, ma'am. This here's my daughter, Sarah Rose. We didn't mean to bother you." Clara stood slowly, brushing the dust from her skirts. Something in the man's gentle manner and the child's innocent faith stirred something deep in her chest. "It's no bother at all. I'm Clara Whitmore." She hesitated, then added, "And yes, I am waiting for someone. Though it seems he may not be coming." Jake's expression softened with understanding. "Mail order arrangement." Clara nodded, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. In Boston, such arrangements were whispered about with a mixture of scandal and sympathy. Here, Jake's tone held neither judgment nor pity, only a kind of practical understanding of the realities of frontier life. "Thomas Brennan was supposed to meet me here this morning," Clara explained. "I've been waiting since the 8 o'clock train." Jake's brow furrowed. "Tom Brennan, stocky fellow with a black mustache. Runs the grain supply over on Cedar Street. I wouldn't know what he looks like," Clara admitted. "We've only exchanged letters." Jake was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. "Ma'am, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Tom Brennan took off 3 days ago. Word around town is he got himself deep in debt to some unsavory folks from Silver Creek, and he had to leave sudden, like in the middle of the night. I'm afraid he's not coming back." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Her knees went weak, and she had to grip her trunk for support. 800 miles from home, with less than $5 to her name and nowhere to go. The magnitude of her situation crashed over her like a river in flood season. Sarah Rose seemed to sense Clara's distress and moved closer, slipping her small hand into Clara's gloved one. "Don't be sad, angel lady. Papa always says when one door closes, another window opens." Jake shot his daughter a look that was equal parts exasperation and affection. "Sarah Rose, why don't you go see if Mr. Henderson has any penny candy in the store? Here's a nickel." He handed the child a coin, and she scampered off toward the general store, but not before giving Clara's hand a reassuring squeeze. When they were alone, Jake's expression grew serious. "Miss Whitmore, I don't mean to pry into your affairs, but do you have family you can return to? Or perhaps another arrangement you could make?" Clara shook her head, unable to trust her voice. The truth was too humiliating to speak aloud. She had burned every bridge in Boston, sold everything of value, and staked her entire future on the promise of a man who had abandoned her without so much as a telegram of explanation. Jake seemed to understand without her saying a word. He looked out across the dusty street, where the afternoon heat was beginning to shimmer off the weathered buildings. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully measured. "Miss Whitmore, I don't know what kind of arrangement you had with Tom Brennan, but I'm guessing you're in a difficult spot right now. My daughter and we live on a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's honest work and peaceful land. Sarah Rose has been without a woman's influence since her mother passed 2 years ago, and I've been struggling to manage the household duties alongside the ranch work." Clara looked at him with surprise, not sure where his words were leading. Jake continued, his cheeks reddening slightly. "What I'm trying to say is, if you're of a mind to stay in Willowbrook, there might be a place for you with us. Not as a wife, mind you, I'm not presuming anything like that, but as a housekeeper and companion to Sarah Rose. You'd have your own room, proper meals, and I'd pay you fair wages. It would give you time to get your bearings and decide what you want to do next." Clara stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. After hours of despair and the growing certainty that she would have to wire her aunt in Philadelphia and beg for money to return east in disgrace, this cowboy was offering her a lifeline. "You don't know anything about me," she said quietly. "I could be completely unsuitable. I could be a terrible housekeeper or unkind to your daughter." Jake smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Miss Whitmore, Sarah Rose has been looking for her angel for 2 years now. In all that time, she's never once asked a stranger if they were sent by her mother. I figure that's got to count for something." Sarah Rose came running back at that moment, clutching a piece of peppermint candy and wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Papa, Mr. Henderson says the angel lady can stay at our ranch if she wants. He says you need all the help you can get." She turned to Clara with shining eyes. "Will you come home with us? I can show you Mama's garden, and we have 3 chickens and a cow named Bessie, and Papa makes the best pancakes in the whole territory." Clara found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. Well, how could I refuse an invitation like that? The ride to the Morrison Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Clara had ever seen. Rolling hills covered in buffalo grass stretched in every direction, punctuated by stands of cottonwood trees that followed the meandering path of a creek. The sky seemed impossibly vast and blue, unmarred by the smoke and haze that perpetually hung over Boston. Jake drove the wagon with easy competence, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history, while Sarah Rose chattered away beside Clara about everything from her pet rabbit to her favorite wildflowers. The ranch house itself was modest but well-built, constructed of weathered pine logs with a stone chimney that spoke of cozy winter evenings. A covered porch ran along the front, furnished with handmade chairs that showed the careful craftsmanship of someone who took pride in their work. Behind the house, Clara could see a barn, several outbuildings, and the promised garden, though it looked somewhat neglected. "Mama planted all those flowers," Sarah Rose explained as they pulled up to the house. "But Papa doesn't know much about keeping them alive. He's better with cows than carnations," Mama always said. Jake helped Clara down from the wagon, and she noticed again the careful courtesy in his manner. His wife had been fortunate in her choice of husband, Clara thought, and the pang of loss she felt was not entirely for her own abandoned dreams. The inside of the house revealed the reality of Jake's struggles as a single father trying to manage both ranch and household. The main room was clean but sparse, furnished with practical pieces that spoke of function over beauty. The kitchen showed signs of a man doing his best with unfamiliar tasks. Dishes stacked neatly but haphazardly, a pot of something simmering on the stove that smelled suspiciously burned. "I know it's not much," Jake said, seeming suddenly self-conscious about his humble home. "Mary always had a way of making everything look just right. But I'm afraid I lack her touch." Clara set down her traveling bag and looked around with the practiced eye of someone who had managed a household since the age of 15. "It's a good, solid home," she said honestly. "It just needs a woman's attention to bring out its character." Sarah Rose took Clara by the hand and led her on a tour that revealed both the challenges and the potential of the situation. The child's bedroom was neat but clearly the work of a father doing his best. Clothes folded but not quite right. Toys organized but without the touches that would make the space truly welcoming to a little girl. Mary Morrison's bedroom had been left largely untouched, a shrine to a love that continued beyond death. "Papa won't let me go in Mama's room," Sarah Rose confided in a whisper. "But sometimes I sit in the hallway and remember how she used to brush my hair and tell me stories about angels." Clara knelt down beside the child, her heart aching for this little girl who had lost so much so young. "Would you like me to brush your hair tonight? I used to do that for my younger cousins back in Boston." Sarah Rose's face lit up like sunrise over the mountains. "Really? And maybe you could tell me about Boston. Papa says it's a place where ladies wear fancy dresses every day and ride in carriages pulled by horses that never get dusty." Clara laughed. "Well, some ladies do. But most of us are just regular people trying to get by, same as anywhere else." That evening, as Clara prepared a proper supper from the ingredients she found in Jake's pantry, she began to understand the scope of the challenge she had agreed to take on. Jake Morrison was clearly a capable rancher and a devoted father, but the domestic arts were foreign territory to him. The meals he had been providing for Sarah Rose were nutritionally adequate, but lacking in any of the small touches that turned sustenance into comfort. As she worked, Clara found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning she had been a desperate woman abandoned at a train station, facing an uncertain future with dwindling resources. Tonight she was preparing dinner for a cowboy and his daughter in a ranch house 10 miles from anywhere, surrounded by more open space than she had ever imagined possible. Jake came in from the evening chores as she was setting the table with dishes that actually matched. A small miracle she had accomplished by digging through various cabinets and storage boxes. He stopped in the doorway, hat in hand, taking in the scene before him. The table was set with care, complete with wildflowers Sarah Rose had gathered and arranged in a mason jar. The smell of actual cooking, not just heating up, filled the kitchen, and his daughter was helping Clara with the final preparations, both of them laughing at something Sarah Rose had said. "It smells like home again," he said quietly, and Clara heard the wealth of emotion in those simple words. Dinner was a revelation for all of them. Sarah Rose ate her vegetables without complaint for the first time in memory, too busy chattering to Clara about her day to mount her usual resistance. Jake discovered that conversation could flow naturally around a properly prepared meal, and Clara found herself genuinely enjoying the company of her unexpected hosts. After Sarah Rose had been tucked into bed with her hair properly brushed and a story about Boston's swan boats, Clara and Jake found themselves sitting on the front porch in the gathering twilight. The sounds of the frontier evening surrounded them, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through grass, the haunting call of a night bird somewhere in the darkness. "I want to thank you again for taking me in," Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I know it was an impulsive decision on your part." Jake rocked slowly in his chair, considering her words. "Maybe it was impulsive," he agreed. "But sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make with our hearts instead of our heads. Sarah Rose hasn't been this happy since—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "Tell me about her mother," Clara said gently, "if it's not too painful." Jake was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with memory. Mary was the kind of woman who could find beauty in a sunset over sagebrush or excitement in the first green shoots of spring. She came west with her family when she was 16, and she never once complained about leaving behind the comforts of civilization. She said the frontier was where people could become who they were truly meant to be, without the weight of other people's expectations holding them back. Clara felt a pang of recognition in his words. Wasn't that exactly what she had been hoping to find when she answered Thomas Brennan's advertisement? "She sounds wonderful," Clara said sincerely. She was. And when she got sick, Jake's voice caught slightly. "She made me promise that Sarah Rose would always know she was loved, that she'd grow up understanding her worth wasn't tied to what other people thought of her." Mary was fierce about that. She said too many women spend their lives trying to fit into spaces too small for their spirits. Clara understood that Mary Morrison had been talking about more than just her daughter. She had been describing the trap that Clara herself had fallen into back in Boston, trying to conform to society's narrow expectations for unmarried women of diminished circumstances. "Sarah Rose told me that you've been telling her that her mother would send an angel to help take care of her," Clara said carefully. Jake's chair creaked as he shifted uncomfortably. "I know it sounds foolish, but she was having nightmares, crying every night for her mama. I had to give her something to hope for, some way to understand that even though Mary was gone, she was still looking out for us." "It doesn't sound foolish at all," Clara assured him. "And who's to say it isn't true? Maybe Mary did send me. Maybe that's why Thomas Brennan disappeared, and why I was still at the station when you and Sarah Rose arrived." Jake turned to look at her in the dim light from the house. "Do you really believe that?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I believe that sometimes what looks like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be exactly what we needed. This morning I thought my life was over. Tonight I feel like it might just be beginning." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Clara threw herself into the task of organizing the Morrison household with the efficiency of someone who had been managing domestic crises since childhood. She inventoried supplies, organized storage areas, established routines for cleaning and cooking, and gradually transformed the house from a place where people merely existed into a home where they could thrive. More importantly, she began to understand the rhythms of ranch life and her place within them. She learned to gather eggs without disturbing the hens, to milk Bessie with confidence, to tend the vegetable garden that Mary Morrison had planted with such care. Sarah Rose became her constant companion and eager student, soaking up attention and feminine guidance like a flower after rainfall. Jake, for his part, proved to be everything Clara could have hoped for in an employer and more than she had dared expect in a friend. He was unfailingly courteous and respectful, never presuming on their arrangement or making her feel like anything other than a valued member of the household. At the same time, she began to see glimpses of the man Mary Morrison had fallen in love with, his dry sense of humor, his genuine care for the people and animals in his charge. his quiet strength in the face of adversity. The first real test of their new arrangement came on a Saturday afternoon in late July, when Sarah Rose fell from the pasture fence and twisted her ankle badly. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the child's cries and came running, her heart in her throat at the sound of genuine pain and fear. She found Sarah Rose sitting in the dirt, clutching her ankle and sobbing. "I can't walk, Miss Clara!" "It hurts so bad and Papa's not here." Clara knelt beside the child, forcing herself to remain calm despite the surge of protective instinct that threatened to overwhelm her rational thoughts. She had helped her mother tend injured neighbors in Boston, but this felt different, more urgent and personal than anything she had faced before. "Let me take a look, sweetheart," she said gently, her hands already moving to examine the injury with careful efficiency. "We're going to take care of you, I promise." The ankle was swollen but not obviously broken. Clara made the quick decision to carry Sarah Rose to the house, where she could properly assess the situation and decide whether they needed to send for the doctor in town. As she lifted the child, Sarah Rose wrapped her arms around Clara's neck and buried her face against her shoulder. "I want Mama," Sarah Rose whispered through her tears. "When I got hurt before, Mama always made it better." Clara's throat tightened with emotion, but she kept her voice steady and soothing. "I know, baby. I know you miss her. But right now you have me, and I'm going to take very good care of you." She spent the next hour bathing the ankle in cold water, wrapping it carefully, and settling Sarah Rose on the sofa with her leg elevated and a book to distract her from the pain. By the time Jake returned from his trip to town, Clara had the situation well in hand, and Sarah Rose was actually giggling at a story Clara was telling about her disastrous first attempt to milk a cow back in Boston. Jake took in the scene, his daughter comfortable and cared for, Clara sitting beside her with medical supplies neatly organized on a nearby table, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. It was as if he had been holding his breath for 2 years and was finally allowing himself to exhale. "What happened here?" he asked, moving quickly to Sarah Rose's side. "I fell off the fence like a silly goose," Sarah Rose explained cheerfully. "But Miss Clara fixed me up just like a real doctor. She says I have to stay off it for a few days, but then I'll be good as new." Jake's eyes met Clara's over his daughter's head, and she saw gratitude there that went far deeper than words could express. In that moment, she realized that she was no longer just the housekeeper he had hired out of kindness. She had become something much more precious and irreplaceable. She had become family. As summer faded into autumn, the rhythms of their shared life deepened and settled into comfortable patterns. Clara found herself looking forward to Jake's return from his daily ranch work, eager to hear about his day and share the small domestic victories and challenges that filled her own. Sarah Rose bloomed under the combination of male and female influence, her natural brightness enhanced by the security of knowing she was cherished and protected. The first real crisis in their arrangement came from an unexpected source. Thomas Brennan returned to Willowbrook in late September, apparently having resolved his financial difficulties, and immediately began asking around town about the mail-order bride he had left stranded at the station. When he learned that Clara was living at the Morrison Ranch, he appeared on their doorstep one evening with the assumption that she would be grateful for his belated rescue. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the sound of an unfamiliar horse in the yard, followed by Jake's voice raised in a tone she had never heard from him before, cold, controlled, and unmistakably dangerous. "I think you'd better turn around and ride back to town, Brennan. The lady isn't interested in anything you have to offer." "No, hold on there, Morrison. That woman came here to marry me, and I have a legal right to. You have no rights here." Jake's voice cut through Brennan's bluster like a knife. "You abandoned her, left her stranded with no word of explanation. As far as I'm concerned, any agreement you had with Miss Whitmore was voided the moment you failed to show up at that station." Clara moved to the window and saw Thomas Brennan for the first time, a heavy-set man with the black mustache Jake had described in an air of barely contained aggression that made her skin crawl. She thought of how different her life would have been if this man had kept his appointment, and she shuddered. "Miss Whitmore!" Brennan called out, apparently having spotted her at the window. "I've come to make things right. I can explain everything, and we can still be married as planned." Before Clara could respond, Sarah Rose appeared at her elbow, having been drawn by the commotion. The child took one look at the scene in the yard, and her face scrunched up in obvious distaste. Who is that mean man yelling at Papa? She asked. And why does he think you want to go anywhere with him? Clara knelt down beside Sarah Rose, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. He's no one important, sweetheart. Just someone who's confused about where he belongs. She stood and walked out onto the porch, Jake immediately moving to stand beside her in a gesture of silent support. Brennan's eyes lit up when he saw her, apparently taking her appearance as acceptance of his proposal. Miss Whitmore! I knew you'd see reason. Go get your things and we can be married by Judge Harrison tonight. I've got a house all ready for you in town. Clara looked at this man who had once represented her only hope for the future, and she felt nothing but pity for his complete misunderstanding of what she had found in the intervening months. Mr. Brennan, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the yard with unmistakable authority. I am not going anywhere with you. When you failed to meet me at the station, you made your choice. I have since made mine. Brennan's face reddened with anger and wounded pride. You can't be serious! You'd rather stay here as a hired hand than be my wife. I'm offering you respectability, a real home, a chance to be a proper married woman. I have a real home, Clara replied calmly, and I am exactly who I'm supposed to be. From behind her, she heard Sarah Rose's clear voice ring out across the evening air. Besides, Miss Clara is our angel. Mama sent her to take care of us, and angels don't leave their families. Brennan sputtered with outrage, but Jake stepped forward before he could respond, and something in the cowboy's posture made it clear that the conversation was over. You heard the ladies, Jake said quietly. Time for you to go. After Brennan had ridden away in a cloud of dust and wounded dignity, the three of them stood together on the porch in the gathering twilight. Clara felt Sarah Rose's small hand slip into hers, and when she looked down, she saw the child gazing up at her with absolute trust and love. You really aren't going to leave us, are you, Miss Clara? Sarah Rose asked with the directness that always caught Clara off guard. No, sweetheart, Clara said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I'm not going anywhere. Jake was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something deeper and more complex than gratitude or relief. When he spoke, his words were carefully measured. Clara, I need you to know, you're not just the housekeeper anymore. You haven't been for months. Your family. Sarah Rose is right. You're exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed you. I can't imagine our lives without you in them. Clara felt her heart do something complicated and wonderful in her chest. She had come west looking for security and respectability as someone's wife. Instead, she had found something far more precious. A home where she was valued for who she was, not what role she could fill. I can't imagine my life without you both either, she admitted. For the first time since I left Boston, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. As autumn deepened into winter, their little family settled into routines that felt as natural as breathing. Clara taught Sarah Rose to knit and embroider, skills that connected the child to generations of women who had found comfort and creativity in the work of their hands. Jake shared the responsibilities of Sarah Rose's education, teaching her to read the weather and the land, to understand the cycles of the seasons and the needs of the animals in their care. The evenings were the times Clara treasured most, when the three of them would gather in the main room after dinner. Jake would work on ranch accounts or mend tack, while Clara sewed or read aloud from books she had ordered from back east. Sarah Rose would play with her dolls or practice her letters, secure in the knowledge that her two favorite people in the world were nearby and paying attention to her small but important concerns. It was during one of these peaceful evenings in December that Sarah Rose asked the question that had been building in Clara's mind for weeks. Miss Clara, when people love each other and want to be a family forever, they get married, right? Clara nearly dropped her needlework, and she saw Jake's head snap up from his ledger book. Well, yes, sweetheart. When two people decide they want to build a life together, they often get married. Sarah Rose nodded thoughtfully. So why don't you and Papa get married? You love each other, don't you? And we're already a family. The innocent question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace, impossible to ignore or dispel. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and couldn't bring herself to look at Jake. They had never spoken directly about the feelings that had grown between them, the way their partnership had deepened into something that felt like love, but had never been acknowledged as such. Jake cleared his throat carefully. Sarah Rose, that's not really how it works. Miss Clara came here to help us, not to. But Papa, Sarah Rose interrupted with the logic that only children possess. Miss Clara said she feels like she belongs here. And you said she's family, and families stay together always, right? Clara finally found the courage to look at Jake and found him watching her with an expression that was part hope, part question, and part barely controlled longing. In his eyes, she saw her own feelings reflected back at her, the love that had grown quietly and steadily through shared responsibilities, small kindnesses, and the daily miracle of choosing to care for each other. Sarah Rose, Clara said gently. Sometimes grown-ups need to talk about important things privately before they can make big decisions. The child nodded sagely. You mean like when Papa and me talked privately about whether we should ask you to stay with us forever? Jake's face reddened. Sarah Rose, you did that? Clara asked, touched by the image of father and daughter discussing her future with the same care they would give to any important family decision. We had a family meeting, Sarah Rose explained proudly. Papa said it wouldn't be proper to ask you to marry us unless we were sure you wanted to be our real family and not just someone doing a job. And I said anyone could see that you love us just like we love you, but maybe you were too shy to say so first. Clara looked between father and daughter, these two people who had become her whole world, and felt something break open in her chest. Not with pain, but with a joy so complete it took her breath away. "And what did you decide in this family meeting?" she asked. Jake set down his ledger and moved to kneel beside Clara's chair, taking her hands in his work, roughened ones. "We decided that if you were willing, we'd like to make this arrangement permanent. Not as employer and housekeeper, but as husband and wife. As a real family." Clara looked into Jake's honest brown eyes and saw her future stretching ahead of her like the vast frontier sky, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jake Morrison?" "I reckon I am," he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Clara Whitmore, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife and Sarah Rose's mother?" "Yes," Clara whispered, and then louder, with joy ringing in her voice. "Yes, yes. Absolutely yes." Sarah Rose let out a whoop of delight and launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their necks and chattering excitedly about wedding dresses and cake and whether they could get married before Christmas. As Clara found herself enveloped in the arms of her chosen family, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had boarded a train in Boston as a desperate woman fleeing the constraints of a society that had no place for her. She had been abandoned by one man and rescued by another, not as his wife but as something far more precious, as herself. The wedding took place on a crisp January morning in the small church in Willowbrook, with Sarah Rose serving as both maid of honor and flower girl. The entire town turned out for the celebration, not because Jake Morrison and Clara Whitmore were particularly prominent citizens, but because their love story had captured the imagination of a community that understood the courage it took to build new lives in an untamed land. Clara wore her mother's pearl necklace, which she had retrieved from the pawn shop in Boston with her first wages from Jake, and a dress of blue silk that Sarah Rose had insisted was the exact color of angel wings. Jake wore his best shirt and a tie that his daughter had helped him select, his face shining with happiness and pride. As they exchanged vows, Clara thought about Mary Morrison and felt no jealousy or sadness, only gratitude for a woman who had loved her family so well that even death could not diminish the blessing she had left behind. Sarah Rose had been right. Mary had sent an angel. But Clara understood now that she had not come to replace the love that already existed in this family. She had come to add her own love to it, to help it grow and flourish in new ways. The reception was held at the Morrisons' ranch, with tables set up in the barn and decorations that Sarah Rose had been planning for weeks. As Clara danced with her new husband under lanterns strung from the rafters, she marveled at the completeness of her joy. She had found not just a husband, but a partner who valued her intelligence and independence. She had gained not just a home, but a place where her contributions were appreciated and her voice was heard. Most precious of all, she had been given the gift of motherhood to a child who had chosen her as surely as she had chosen Sarah Rose. Late that night, after the guests had gone home and Sarah Rose had been tucked into bed with promises that nothing would change except that now they would all have the same last name, Clara and Jake sat together on their front porch,